Thank you. All right. So I think we're all realizing, especially listening to the things that was talked about yesterday, that the interaction paradigms we've seen before have really been changing in, let's say, the last 10 years or something. If we think back 10 years, all the things that have been changing. Who of you were at the AI talks yesterday? Yeah. It's when you listen to all this, you are talking about the math and the technical sides, but there's a human side to it that is, I mean, we had all sorts of different questions, more about the society side, the human side, how we're going to interface with all of this. And it's something we need to figure out. There are some few people that are obviously in companies like Google that are focusing on this, but most interaction designers, most software engineers, most schools, they don't really think about how we're supposed to interact in this brave new world. But we've had 10 years to figure it out, and we haven't really started in general. So it is a bit surprising that whenever you're on a typical IT project, we're really just sticking to what we've been doing for decades. I'm on a project now, and it's just for desktop. We'll do a mobile version later. We'll consider that later, because right now we're using big screens, so we'll design it for big screens. It'll work really well on a HD monitor, and someday maybe journalists will be writing on tablets or interacting with their articles on a mobile phone, but that's not important. That's not the world we live in. We live in the world where you go to the office and you write the article there and you talk to your colleague, you have a coffee, and you go back. But I'm not really convinced that that's the world we actually live in. I think we're just used to doing things in a certain way, and we need to start waking up and thinking about how we're going to do things differently, how we're going to make things work. The interesting thing is that when we first had computers, when we first came up with computers, we really started from a very different standpoint. We were asking ourselves, well, how should these computers work? How should we talk to them? Well, obviously, they should try and understand how human works. So they should be compatible with human speech. Yeah, I should have shown you this little graphic. That was actually back in the 70s. And if you update that with a bit of colors and a bit of things, then it looks a lot like what we keep on trying to reproduce. That was the Xerox Alto Arc computer from, early 70s. Costs, the cheapest one they came out with was like $10,000 or $20,000 or something like that. So, we were all inspired in the beginning by this movie. HAL 9000 was this magic machine in the future, which was 15 years ago, 2001, that we would be speaking to. So the interface of the future would be speaking, and it would speak back. It would understand our language, whatever language we spoke, it would understand it. It would understand sentiment, it would understand emotions. We talked about emotions yesterday. Incentives, all these complicated human constructs that really drive the way we communicate, the way we think, the way we interact. And obviously that didn't go anywhere, because computers at the time couldn't understand speech, and they couldn't speak. So we turned to text interfaces instead. We asked ourselves, well, okay, so we can't talk to a computer and it can't speak back. But could we, for instance, ask it a question or describe a problem that we have? And then it would, based on information that it already had been trained with, so just like you go to the doctor, you explain your symptoms, and then the doctor, based on all the knowledge that the doctor has accumulated, knows what process of questions to go through. So it's not, you don't just go into the doctor's room, and then you stand there, you make a speech for the doctor, and then the doctor says, right, I have the answer, here it is. and then you go home. That's not how it works. It's a conversation that goes back and forth. The doctor asks to clarify and so on. So that was basically what they, at the time, tried to build. Now we know that it takes a lot more computing power. The problem that they had was that computers, in order to recognize all the details of the described problems, in order to match it up with solutions and so on, it's not realistic to program every answer and every question in systematically. We have to be more clever than that when we want these general solutions like going to the doctor or something like that. That doesn't mean that you can't do this approach where you have a predictable conversation and a useful result, that you can't have a strict set of that. You can, but it's just not for things like going to the doctor or equivalent things. For other things, it works quite fine. There. So today we have a lot of compute power. That was, I think, early 90s or something like that, that you would have, that's a $20 million Cray computer. And you'll probably find that your watch or your phone or whatever device that you use every day will have as much or more computing power than this one did back then. So of course, there's a huge difference in what we can do today, and so there should also be a huge difference in the solutions we pick today. We should do things in a different way. We should not try and do things the way we would do them when that was a big computer. We should rethink our solutions based on the resources we have available. So let's take an example of a typical thing that we probably all interact with every day. Up here, you have a typical address entry to the right, as we've all used them, where you as a user, you have to recognize each of the words. So if it's in a foreign language, you don't really know exactly what they mean. You have to think about, well, if I'm on a particular floor, do I put it in the number or do I put it in the street? I have a friend that has a really odd address, but she both has a letter after the number, she has a floor and an apartment number. So that's 4 different potential fields. And which address entry form will understand that? None. It doesn't exist, that address entry. And then you enter the state first and the zip code in order to get the autocomplete for the street name. That whole thing, I once did a form like that, and we actually ended up spending like 2 months on just that, on the interactive behavior and autocompletes and the bugs and the issues and so on. It doesn't make any sense to do it this way. It looks simple when you sit in a meeting and discuss it, but it's not simple to the users and it's not simple to make. Now consider this one over here, where you just in principle have one field to enter in, and you can enter whatever you want. So you can enter a street name, you can enter a street with the street number first, you can enter a zip code, you can enter a city, and as you enter more information, it'll move down when it has understood you and write out the address. So you could start out with the city, you could write the whole thing in one line. And you just have some more intelligence, you have some more smarts. It will take up less space. It will have the same interface no matter what country you're in, whatever, so you can adapt the logic to the context. You don't have to redesign, you don't have to have 5 different designs of what an address input is like. Or take down here, where if you've used Excel or Access, who knows these type of applications where you have tables and you can filter and sort them, yeah. It's a pretty typical paradigm. I remember implementing that sort of paradigm in the 90s, that when it was fairly modern, that you could just have loads of tables and filter them and so on. But actually, it's a problematic interface, because here you have 2 IDs. I once did a trading application and we had an international ID and a national ID for the same things. There's some obscure numbers and so on, and when you see the ID, you might not know which one it applies to. So which one are you going to filter? Where are you going to put the filter? You as a user have to understand that number, I know that that is this international code because it has this format. Why is that relevant to the user? The user just has an ID for some stock they want to trade, and they should just enter that stock and it should show up. Whether that ID is in the name or the ID or whatever, who cares? The approach with the search field that we've learned from decades with Google now should be the way to go. It's the smarter interaction control, takes up less space, it's more useful and requires less of the user. So, complete change of thinking. So that was about the UI, and now it's about the sort of things that the sort of world we're living in as opposed to 10 years ago, 20 years ago. In the beginning, we all said, yeah, Facebook, that's just a bit of a distraction. It's just something to do when you have nothing better to do. And today we have Facebook addicts. We have people that wake up in the morning, the first thing they do, before they get out of bed, before they do anything, they check Facebook, and before they go to sleep, after they've done everything in their day, just check Facebook. And it's not even conscious. It's just a habit. It's not out of, and there's no objective. There's no, I have to do this or I have to do that. It's just something that we get used to doing. And we need to start asking ourselves, why do we build these habits? Instead of ranting, instead of saying, oh, that's terrible, it shouldn't be like this. It is like this. This is human beings. This is how we are. This is how we function. We should start thinking when we design websites, when we design apps, when we design products and services and so on, we should ask ourselves, why is it like this? What is it about Facebook that makes it like that? Because if you can recreate with whatever you do that effect, you're just fine. You'll be just fine, and people will like whatever it is that you make. Whether you think that this is great or not doesn't really matter, because if you're making something that you can be proud of and people like, done deal. Then we have chat apps. Chat apps are actually fascinating because they're the other thing that we spend a ton of time with. We didn't used to spend so much time. Yes, we had SMS, and that became a huge thing. But chat apps are way bigger than SMS because it takes it a step further. It has a lot of advantages. For chat apps, there's the basic chat where you just chat with somebody. So you're just having a conversation with another person. Somebody starts the conversation by asking a question, hey, can you help me out? Or do you know, or have you heard, or whatever it is. And then you have a little back and forth, and then you're done. But the next step is that Silicon Valley has spent the last couple of years being really excited about chatbots or conversational UI or whatever you want to call it, which are not new. We've had chatbots. I mean, developers have known chatbots for quite a long time, and they've apparently also existed with the AOL chat and so on. The basic premise of a chatbot is that it's a counterpart that you can talk to. So they might have a name or it might have a function or something, and you can ask it questions to clarify things or something like that. It can also be used to have a conversation. There's a couple of famous psychology tests that are quite old by now. ElizaBot was one of the first ones. Simple little social experience done by, I think it was a Stanford professor in linguistics and psychology. And it's a program. It is not AI. It is not algorithms or anything. It's really, really early, and it's not long. It's a couple of kilobytes of software. And at the time, people were shocked that it seemed intelligent. Obviously, it didn't seem intelligent because it's simplification. But chatbots can do interesting things. They can also be used for listening in on conversations and making comments. So for instance, a useful chatbot could be a chatbot that identifies unusual words and clarifies the meaning so everybody knows what they are talking about. So that can be extracted to mean a lot of, or to be used for a lot of different terminology or something like that. But I think a more interesting thing is the idea of what I would call chat applets, where the message can be interactive. So consider, for instance, that you're in a chat and somebody sends you a trip that they've booked for you and them, where in that little bubble, you can actually go and change your seat number. So there you could make something like that. That means that you can send a little piece in as a message to somebody else in the chat, in the context. So you have the discussion. You don't have to, when you go back to it, you can find it by your memory of that conversation. You can go and find that thing and confirm it that way and take the interaction from there. Go from there into the application maybe where you can do more things. It contextualizes, it puts it in context. It allows you to have a small piece of information that you can interact with. That's quite an interesting concept, which of course can be combined with chatbots. So you have a chatbot for ordering a pizza, and then you just ask, I would like to order pizza for tonight, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes up with as it has understood your order, and you can tweak the order. It's a very short conversation, but it would also allow you to make additional comments that would be attached to your order, and maybe the staff at the other end will be able to respond to you directly. So that's an example of a combination of these two that I think would probably make for a fairly constructive user interface. Bear in mind that a lot of these chatbots are, to be honest, terrible, and they're poorly done, they're rushed out the door, the user interface, the interaction of it is really poorly thought out. So I think on Facebook there are now already 10,000 chatbots after they released it. I don't remember what it was 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever. And that's typical. I mean, we saw it with Facebook games and so on. Things have a certain hype cycle where they boom and bust, but it's not going to go away. But we need to figure out a lot of things. We need to be a lot better at making a useful experience with these things. Chat engagement is really interesting because it's personal. If you think in contrary, our typical way of making websites, they're not personal because we're not really having that two-way relationship building. You really need to put a lot of effort into a website in order to give it a personal feel where you build a relationship. That's hard work, and it's something that's rarely done. You have a two-way conversation, and you have a focus of content because it's whatever you're talking about now. Think about it when you have a conversation. At any given time, you only talk about one topic. You never talk about two topics in parallel at the same time. But we do it all the time on websites. All the time. Sidebars, distractions, ads, 5 different conversations on the same page. And it's not constructive. We are meant to have one conversation at a time with one topic. That's what our brain is good at. We're good at focusing on one dialogue. And it's a way to get information. It doesn't have to be a conversation between 2 people. It can be abstracted in many ways. And here in this example, we have a food order that says something about what it is, and the delivery time, and the address. Plain and simple, doesn't take up a lot, can easily fit on any mobile phone, doesn't have to be squashed in. You can put it on a website, in an app, wherever. It would fit in anything, that interface. Yeah, here we have a bit of some other sketches. You could have a doctor's appointment there. Welcome to our clinic. You have an upcoming appointment. You just go and visit. You just go and visit the clinic's page, app, whatever destination the clinic has. And you have a little message there. Your next appointment is next Monday, 12 to 13. And it's here on the map. So you can click the map. You can click the time to reschedule. And if you would like to know something around your appointment, you can just type it. And it says, we typically respond this fast. So you have set some expectations, there's no distractions, there's nothing to take you away from it, but it gives you additional control. It gives you a reason to use this over picking up the phone, waiting on a call line and calling them. So let's jump to navigation. One thing when I looked at the chatbots that really struck me, and that's probably why I started the idea for this talk, is when we do navigation on web or applications, we tend to have all these menu structures. We start out with a fairly simple menu with 5 or 6 topics, and then as people come in and want to add more information to the website, the menu grows. And all of a sudden it becomes a monster, and we say, oh, we need to hide all these extra things because they're not so often used. They still need to be there because you never know if people want to go from ordering potatoes straight to checking out the weather. I mean, that might be something you really want to do when you're ordering potatoes, to see what the weather is going to be tomorrow. We fill up the pages with navigation that is completely irrelevant for what the page does. And it happens in most cases. So on mobile, we struggle, right? Obviously, because the mobile phone is not meant to have so much stuff, but we still try to cram it in. The chat interface is super simple. You don't need a back button. If you want to find something that you looked at before, you just scroll up. And if you don't find it, you scroll further. That's it. And you roughly remember, because we're good at this sort of sequence and spatial relationship, you roughly remember how far you need to go in order to find the things. And when you see a particular point in the chat, you remember that chat and you're like, yeah, I need to go up a bit further. No, that was before, so I need to go a bit down. You also have the fact that the most important stuff is at the bottom, and the less important stuff is further up. Because obviously what you talked about yesterday is not as important as what you're talking about now. And what they just said, now you can actually have some autocomplete, you can have suggestions, you can have easy ways of continuing the conversation without sitting down and typing, because typing on touch devices is not the most convenient. Typing in general should be avoided. If we could just press a button instead, that would be much better. It's faster, easy. You don't have to, you don't make any spelling mistakes. It's quite clear what it is that you're saying. And then, of course, down at the bottom, it allows you to say anything that you want. Towards the bottom, yeah, no sideways scrolling, another interesting thing. You won't find sideways scrolling in chat. You don't really have that conversation. There's just one direction, and the direction has a meaning. It's not random things that are connected. So you know what you're going to find when you scroll. And no need for a back button. Oh, okay, so I missed out one interesting little thing. If you've seen the recent update to Apple Maps, you'll see that the search box has moved down from being on the top. It's sort of in the lower third, at the top of the lower third, with suggestions below it, which is much easier, and it sort of changes the order of priority, where you actually, it's like here, and then you have the map up there. There's nothing to press up here in the top, which is far away from your fingers. And then down here is where you would click in order to type. And then when you start typing, the keyboard comes up just below it, just like it would in a chat app. So, back to voice. So in the beginning of this whole thing, back in the 60s and 70s, we concluded we can't make a HAL 9000. Computers don't understand voice, they can't speak, and so on. But that's changing. Voice recognition is actually becoming usable. We, as humans, we don't like when we say something and then the computer just acts weird. We don't like that. And it only takes a couple of those experiences before we check out and say, no, not going to do that one. And it's hard enough as it is. When I go on holiday, I could use an audio interface driving in the car. But then I might wake up the other passengers that might be sleeping. Or they might say, what? What are you talking? Why are you, what? What's going on, right? It can be very awkward and very weird, but that being said, it is a super useful means of interacting when you don't want to use your hands, like you're driving, or you don't want to avert your eyes, you don't want to look somewhere else. You want to focus on what you're doing, which is driving, but you still want to have the ability to make additional choices and interactions. Or you just think of something and you want to make a note. So you just want to dictate something quickly. But it has to work 100% or 99.9%. And not surprisingly, the 4 big tech companies, they are each going for making their voice assistant and so on and so forth. And it is definitely something that we'll see more and more of. And it's definitely something we'll be more used to using. But I think we typically underestimate how hard it is to do these things right. Because working most of the time is the same as not working. Then we have one other thing that has changed in the last decade. It's the size of the screens we use. Like I said before, we try and design websites like this, which is the latest Digitech website. They had a redesign, I don't remember, a year ago, 2 years ago. So it is a recent design. But if you look at how that will render on a phone, really poorly. So how would you propose to squeeze all of this information in that screen size? It's a really hard job. And you have some really frustrating meetings and discussions about how we're going to remove stuff that you know some users will want to use. Yes, but you only use the phone when you are walking on the street. No, you don't. Okay, but then you only use it when you're outside the house. No, that's not true either. Okay, most people use a phone, they don't use a tablet. Yeah, but how many of your users are you going to alienate? How many are you going to say, yeah, you don't matter either? Okay, so there's 1% over there we don't care about, there's 1% over there, and before you know it, you don't care about a third of all your users. So we need to stop this obsession with boxes and boxes and boxes and come up with better interfaces that will work across a wide range of devices and user scenarios, both with voice and with visual. I mean, this website, how well will it work with somebody that's blind? Right? It's not going to work very well. Will a chat interface work with somebody who's blind? Yes. It's not that complicated to think about how you would make it work. There's much less information at a time. The information has a context, it has an order. It's much, much easier to reason about when you want it to work everywhere. Am I doing on time? Cool. So, what would the design process be for this? That's the big question. I don't necessarily have the right answer, but I have an answer. The first thing you need to get right is all sorts of questions around personality and empathy. When you are having a conversation, personality is crucial. When you're talking to somebody, how they come across, what words they use, what intonation they use, what colors they use, the topics that they pick. All of that stuff is what you judge it based on. You don't judge it based on whether there's some pretty graphic in their conversation. That's not that's not the communication you are looking for. You need to think about how you open conversations, the conversation openers, what's the starting point for the conversation, and how to lead the conversation. Because if you have a random conversation with somebody, it's very hard to reason about. If you can talk about anything and you're jumping around, if you jump around, you're probably going to make them stressed. If they jump around, they're probably going to make you stressed. And if you are a computer, you're going to have a problem because you're not going to be able to make these human leaps of association. You need to focus the conversation. So the conversation opener sets the tone for what you're talking about and what is acceptable to talk about. So in the example of the doctor's appointment, if you just introduce your next appointment is, you sort of say, this is to talk about appointments. This is not to ask, what's wrong with me, doctor? I'm having a pain in the left side. Can you please tell me about that? So you shouldn't start out with a blank screen, because then you don't know what you need to know, because they could be saying anything in return. You want to think about the overall flow. This is not just a question of chat interfaces or something similar. This can be seen in a bigger frame of when you are an organization, or you have a personal website, or you are making an app, or you have a service, you've made a product that has some digital part, or you have an instruction manual with your physical product, or you have an office where people are greeted in reception, you have a support hotline, you write letters to them, you write emails. It's all part of a conversation that you're having with that person. If you talk to the doctor and you've talked to the receptionist and you go to the website, it's the same conversation that you're having with the doctor's office as a whole. So you need to have a coherent plan for how that conversation should go on from before they become your customer or user or whatever. When they first are introduced to you, they have an expectation. They base that on how they were introduced, and it'll go through from there. Boxes and arrows is an interesting phrase for that. We like to design boxes. We draw boxes, and then we say, okay, so here's the website front page, and here's the about page. Okay, there's a transition between there. What makes you go to the about page? Why are you going there? What are you doing next? What did you do before? And then you need to think about what the history, how you're going to handle the conversation history. Showing maybe the history from last time you chatted, next time you come back. How you're going to interpret that history in terms of past events. And maybe you can have a coherent history of interacting with the user across all sorts of channels that you communicate with. The first thing with personality is in UX design, we have this concept called personas. And the first time I tried out personas, I was like, not sure. I think personas are hard and easy at the same time. It's easy if you have a really well-defined persona, then you just use it, then you just discuss, okay, with this person, would it work for this person? And a good persona is somebody you get it when you skim through it, and you can visually imagine what sort of person it is, you can emotionally imagine what sort of person it is. You have clearly some clear ideas of what would work for them and wouldn't work for them. So that's something to look into. If you haven't tried it, that's something to discuss. But if you are to design conversations, you need to know who you're talking to. if you don't know who you're talking to, it's impossible to define vocabulary or tone of communication or relevance or any other things that you can come up with. You need to know who you're talking to. And equally, you need to know what sort of personality you have as an organization, how you want to talk to them. Do you want to be formal, informal? Do you want to be slightly boring? Do you want to be slightly bubbly? Do you want to be jokey? Do you want to be... There's so many possibilities, and you can get it terribly wrong. Good example with a chatbot was it clearly had a bug because it was suggesting 3 answers. And when you click one of them, it happened to not understand that answer. So what it showed was this sort of 404 of chatbots, which was, sorry, I don't understand what you just said, so I'll show you a picture of a kitten. So, okay, so what I get from that as a user is that you don't care about my time, you think I'm here to just play around and I don't really expect anything from you, you're not really planning on providing me any value, and I should not be here. And this is the sort of thing we need to get right. If we don't get this right, it doesn't matter if we have all sorts of cool technology that can do all the 95% other things in an amazing way. We need to understand what's the person we're talking to and what sort of person are we? And what's the setup for this whole thing? This is what I think most websites look like if we look at the personality of the website. They're just complete schizophrenics. They're just made by 20 different people with 20 different opinions. They all design it for themselves. They're not really thinking about what it's going to be like using this for somebody else. They're just like, well, I would like to use it, I think. And then somebody else comes along and is like, no, I don't like that color, let's change that. And then you're like, we need a coherent personality more than we need fancy colors or cute kittens or funny jokes or whatever. We need to open the conversations in good ways. We all know conversations when they get weird or when they go off track or whatever. And I just think we need to think about this. I'm not entirely sure about the details, but it's something along those lines there. It's a good one, isn't it? Okay, so that's it for me. I'm preparing a book that I hope to have ready next summer. And we are going to make a seminar here in Zurich where we take even a wider approach, and we look at technologies for communicating directly with customers. The idea that somehow we should now have the tools and technologies for having a direct conversation with thousands, tens of thousands, with large groups of people without requiring a person every time, all the time at the other end, but still having the feeling on both sides that we are really communicating as human beings. So, any questions?
Thank you for the talk.
Welcome.
I'm not sure if it's question or a reflection, but I'm thinking the whole idea is based on the fact that we want to communicate with the application or the tool. But
or with the people behind it.
Exactly. So if you want to communicate with the people behind it, we could think of Twitter, where we could address people with a bunch of words, millions of people, in a simple, intuitive way. But there we might be going one step further, thinking that this is no longer a medium. So it's no longer a medium of communication, but a medium target. So the application becomes like the target of our communication. So we want to communicate with this application. So yeah. There could be some usage for this. For instance, I want to reserve a taxi or a restaurant, and then this special smart agent, automated agent knows my tastes, etc. So I see it in terms of certain applications But it doesn't mean every application should now be designed in this way, and I fear it becomes a trend
No.
and with no purpose.
No, I completely agree. The problem is squeezing this topic into a short talk. Because what I would actually prefer to talk about is what you're saying. But that's even more meta, because that's completely designer talk, where nothing is concrete. Everything is about human beings, how we interact, and how we converse. And it's very hard to show anything about that. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that we need to think about human beings have conversations. And this is also about copywriting, this is also about content design on your website or your app, how you word things, how you talk to people. What we tend to do is that we make websites that are speeches like this one, where we make blog posts or articles that are speeches. We're just communicating our point of view. Done. You can write a comment. Yeah, but what's the comment about? Can't we just discuss the topic? Can't we find ways to turn an article with comments into a conversation that evolves over time? Does that? Yeah? Yeah. Everybody talks about chatbots and conversational interfaces. That's just one example. But it does show us something about the user interface can be different. It doesn't have to look the same as we've been doing for 20, 30 years. Yes?
So
all questions are welcome, or comments.
Hi. Actually, I'm just going back to the chatbot topic.
Okay.
Just because there's experience. So that's something which is already in use. And from a customer side, there are a lot of live chat applications.
Mm-hmm.
And most people also think there are always real people behind, which is in a lot of cases not true.
Yeah.
So a lot of those software work in a way that a chatbot will initiate the communication, and people are monitoring, or so a smaller team will monitor in parallel those conversations and just step in where they need. But it also often lets the customer feel that, it looks like I was talking to chatbot before, because then it switches and you feel if there is a switch.
A change of tone, yes.
Exactly. And so from a user experience, would you say that is counterproductive if companies do this, or is it just a beginning which we need to fine-tune, and a good way on how to get this half automated, half personal interaction?
If you're asking my opinion, I think it's really poor design. Right? Obviously, it's poor design. It's something we need to learn equally. When you do something the first time, you don't do it very well, and then hopefully you have a second time to do it better. There's starting to become a lot of classic examples of this. One good distinction that I heard on a design podcast, O'Reilly Design Podcast, very good podcast. Intercom is another very good one on these sort of topics. They were talking about that if you download an app that has a name, maybe it's Alexa or whatever name it is, the name of the bot is the name of the app. You expect that you are talking to an artificial entity. That's fine, that's not a problem. You've set the expectations and you know who you're talking to. In this case, what you are talking about, I would consider having an icon that reflects the team, maybe a couple of chat heads with the people that are actually on the shift at the moment. So you're not talking to a person, you're talking to 2 or 3 people, and it talks about we. And then when somebody comments that from the team actually, it's maybe you have a different chat bubble that is the person. So you're not trying to lie about what's going on here. You can see very clearly. Or you have a team bubble that just has a name and then some other clear indication that this is just automated in order to speed up the conversation. But it's with good design is based on making it for real people and validating that it will work with real people before you throw it out there. That's good design. I mean, it's not good design just to come up with something random, throw it out there, and hope that people don't hate it too much. That's not good design. I mean.